and welcome to a review of the Sonus Faber Lumina 1 speakers, priced at £799. Now, I was talking to Sonus Faber about these particular speakers and that price point, because that price point is the entry level for the entire Sonus Faber range. And from what I hear, and you've got to take inflation into account, I suppose, on this, this is the lowest price point there has ever been in relative terms, that is, for the Sonus Faber speaker range. Now, as you can see, these speakers are comparatively dinky. They span 280mm by 148 by 213mm. Flown in directly from their home base in Italy, they weigh in at a fairly substantial 4.4 kilograms a piece. They're available in black, walnut, and that weird wooden finish called wenge, which I really can't take too seriously, to be absolutely honest with you. The rear of the cabinets, as you can see on the right hand model here, is covered in real leather. On the left hand speaker there, you can see the chrome accents that adorn the front. These speakers offer a low-key yet stylish presentation. Now, around the back, if I just twist this one here, you'll see there are two pairs of binding posts, and we'll get a closer look at those binding posts in just a second. But before we do, and under the supplied magnetic grille covers, you'll find two drive units. The toppermost is called a DAD. This means damped apex dome. This is a silk dome tweeter spanning an unusual 29mm. Below that, looking slightly sheepish and withdrawn, is a miniature 120mm mid-bass unit of paper construction. So we're not looking at particularly exotic materials here. There's no beryllium or materials shaved from a passing comet to delight the press release. The speakers have a downward firing slit vent that's positioned towards the rear of the cabinet. The vent itself is given room to maneuver by raising the speaker a tad on a small U-shaped structure that in itself appears to be slotted on three sides, but really isn't. This letterbox hole you can see is available at the front of the speaker though. Despite the forward-firing lower venting, it's still recommended that you position the speakers at least a metre from the rear wall, but tweak the distance to suit your ears. Now, as we're looking at the two sets of binding posts, centre top, just under the Lumina 1 name, you can see the 4 ohms sign, which means these speakers will need a bit of a shove to get going. The actual sensitivity is pretty darn low at 84 decibels. So adding all of that up together, how do the Lumina 1 speakers actually sound? Well, let's pop over to the sound quality tests and we'll find out. And welcome to the sound tests for the Sonus Faber Lumina 1. And yeah, it's a fairly dinky little speaker, this one. This certainly feels a solid design. I began my sound tests with a slab of vinyl, to wit Mr. Mike Oldfield and the 1978 Virgin release Incantations. Now, I selected this particular album because it has a nice blend of synths and organic instruments. Also, there's a little bit of compression there, so I wondered how the Sonus Fabers would cope with that. And just as a quick tangent, you'll notice old Mike on the cover there looking rather winsome and windswept, while all hell breaks loose behind him. The guy looks as though he really should be wearing a scarf. But there is talk that the image at the back was a separate photograph and Mike was sort of slapped onto that, and you can sort of see that Mike Oldfield looks far too relaxed while everything is going on behind them, all that locomotion. If that was me, I'd be certainly hunched up against the elements. But back to the review. So yes, this album does feature a little bit of compression. It's not too aggressive, but it's there during crescendos on wind instruments, choral voices, cymbals and high-pitched synths, especially at high volumes. And in some ways, the sound quality from the Lumina 1 was sort of deja vu all over again, because recently I did a review of an amplifier, the Cambridge CXA61, link above if you want to check that one out, and I compared that to my reference Audiolab 6000A. There were similarities with this speaker review, to be honest with you. In that amplifier review, I said that the Cambridge amplifier was a solid performer, focused, and did the best with the information it could immediately lay its hands upon. But it never stretched itself to find new details on the edge of the soundstage to surprise and amaze. The 6000A amplifier could surprise and amaze and offered a greater mid-range insight, but wasn't as focused or as balanced. Now, I used a pair of similarly priced Martin Logan 15i speakers for this particular review, and you could say that took the Audiolab 6000A role. You could talk about the Sonus Faber Lumina 1s in the Cambridge amplifier role. Here, the Martin Logans offered a superior dynamic reach. The upper mids and treble tapped into fine detail that was easily exhibited via the likes of bells and cymbals. The Lumina 1s just didn't reach as far. Instead, while the Lumina 1s did provide a wealth of mid-range and treble detail alongside a low noise performance, they also offered solidity and reliability and a sense that the information it could reach out and scoop into its arms was superbly processed. It did the very best with what it had. Hence, the Lumina 1 speakers had a slightly conservative upper frequency approach to music, but it was rock solid during the translation of the same, while the compressive effects I normally heard from this particular LP were largely removed. In comparison, the Martin Logans found new and fascinating pieces of detail, but did so while sometimes sounding a little uncontrolled and fragile. A bit like watching a tightrope walker making steady progress, and then he pauses, and then there's a wobble, and the crowd below gasp in case he falls. The Martin Logans are relatively devil-may-care in their attitude. The Lumina 1s, in comparison, sounded totally reliable and immensely dependable. So, extending the Martin Logan metaphor, if the Martin Logans are a tightrope walker, the Lumina 1s is some bloke walking down the street. That's how dependable they are. Hence, you don't even bother watching the figure. You know he's going to be fine. You're totally convinced that the guy will complete his task of walking from A to B. Similarly, you feel quite safe and reassured when listening to the Sonus Fabers. They produce a sense of reliability and steadiness. You know these speakers won't be tripped up. It's as if they produce music from a granite base. When listening to music, because of that lack of real dynamic reach, the Sonus Fabers did sound a little bit compromised in terms of tonal realism. But when it came to tonal balance, that was a different picture. For tonal balance, the Lumina 1s were quite superb, and that meant that the bass played a fuller part in the mix than just about any comparable pair of small, stand-mounted speakers I've heard at this price point. So with the Lumina 1s, you do feel as though you're getting a rounded picture of all the information contained in the piece of music you're listening to. So here, bass had weight and heft, despite the small size of the cabinets. Sure, there's no real deep bass here, but there was more than you might initially expect. Put it that way. Now, there is a lot of delicacy and a demand for accuracy from this Mike Oldfield album, so I turned to CD for something a little bit more energetic. So I selected Depeche Mode's Violator and the track Enjoy the Silence. But how could I enjoy the silence? Because, well, I was listening to, suddenly, a pair of bass monsters. I know, sounds rather odd, doesn't it? But for a small pair of speakers like the Lumina 1s, they really hammered the bass. That bass vent really earned its corn. Okay, the bass response could sound a little strained if pushed to the limits, and considering the size of the cabinet, that's no real surprise. But the tonal balance I mentioned earlier laid a thick, lower frequency floor upon which the music grooved to high heaven. Now, part of the reason for this bass performance, I feel, is that you can't go playing footsie with the Lumina 1s. You can't be gentle with these speakers, I'm afraid. You've got to whack up the gain. You've got to throw power at these little cabinets. Basically, you've got to tell your amp to get stuck in. And once that happened, the Lumina 1 speakers woke up, shook a leg, and bang, they were off. They produced the sort of confident bass performance, relative to the cabinet size of course, that I'm used to hearing from PMC's 21i designs rated at £2,000. And while all that bass was happening, the mid-range and treble performance was providing enough energy and detail to plaster a big smile on my face at the very least. So what do I think of the Sonus Faber Lumina 1 speakers? Well, while I do recommend a demo to make sure that the sonic signature allies with your own musical preferences, if you want a wholly reliable and solid pair of stand-mounted speakers with a superb tonal balance and the ability to surprise you in bass terms, then definitely pencil these little fancies onto your list. Yes, they need a good shove to get going, but once they are going, they'll give you a surprising amount of sonic quality. And that's me done. Thank you very much for staying with me to the end of this video. I'm going to be making another one next week, and I hope you're there to see it. I would love to have your company, so please join me then. Until then, bye bye for now.